All right, so that was probably a minute and we're pretty good. It's got this sort of nice viscosity to it, and I'm gonna start similarly to the way I did before, is that I'm going just to pour it over the mold. Maybe a little thin for my liking. Gonna make sure that that material sort of flows up all onto all of the mold, onto all of the little areas. It's paying special attention to the holes that I've created with my vents. Yeah, that was too thin. We can wait a little bit longer, but that's okay. I'll talk to you guys a little bit while we're waiting about some things that you want to think about. So when you're making your molds, I want you to make the first and second layer in quick succession of one another. You would never start putting your detail layer on and then take a break before your second layer. That's a delicate layer. It's not very thick. It's prone to damage, and it's losing it's going through its chemical change very quickly because of the thinness of the material. So I want you to get that second layer on while it is still cool and damp to the touch. After you've put the second layer on, once it is complete, this is a point where you can pause if you want to. I do not recommend it. It is easier just to make your whole mold in one go. But if you know that you need to schedule in a pause for whatever reason, after this second layer is done, is a good way, it's a good stopping place. You can take your mold off of the table on its coddle and put it on the shelf. Just know that if you are going to take a break for more than, I would say, 20 minutes, you must dampen your second layer before you put your third layer on. Otherwise, the layers will tend to delaminate. And I will remind you of that again if necessary. So I'm scraping some up. It's still a little thin. I tend to be a little impatient at this point. I'm not gonna do a whole lot of touching until it's a little thicker. I'm just scooping it off, trying to accumulate some material onto the mold. After this layer, you'll see that the object will have had most of its recognizable shape obscured, but the silhouette of the object will still be visible. So you'll still be able to see that there's a narrowing and a widening. And we'll just hang out. You can fast forward through this time, but I also think it might be useful for you to see how long it takes in real time for the plaster silica to stiffen. I'm gonna periodically feel what's going on in my bucket, and I have the option of pouring out my material onto my table and letting it thicken here if it's getting thick, but I'm still not quite ready to use it, and cleaning my bucket. We might do that with the third layer, but you can see that it's really starting to take on this gorgeous, thicker shake quality. I'll give it a few more moments to get a little bit more body so it doesn't run. And then we'll pour more on, and then we're gonna use one of the scraping tools to scrape it up. We'll clean the bucket before we do that. All right, that's feeling pretty good. It still looks quite liquidy, but I can feel that it's gotten quite a lot of body to it. So I know that I'm getting to a sort of a danger zone where it will start to set up a bit faster and it won't flow quite as well as I need it to. So similarly to the face coat, I'm gonna pour more on than I need. And then I'm going to clean my bucket and then come back and scrape onto my mold to really make sure everything is covered. So bucket, squeegee out as much of the liquid as you can into your garbage pail, and then do a quick rinse just to get everything off. Paying special attention to the ridge at the top and the bottom. And you might want to do this sort of speedily because the plaster is setting pretty quickly right now. So that looks pretty good. Over to the sink. And here we go. I'm going to rinse off my hands so I don't get the handle of this really messy. And then I'm going to start scraping up. Pulling up and away, and sort of occasionally dolloping some on top. Gently sort of nudging the plaster into the areas that I know are going to be harder to fill, like those holes that I made with my vents. And trying not to sort of smash into my object too hard with my tool. I'm exposing the Sharpie line so I know what I'm building towards. Isn't this very satisfying?
Mm-hmm. This is the best part, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You don't have to do this with a tool. You can do this with your hands if you like. Sometimes two hands is really good. As the plaster silica starts to thicken, it's going to start adhering to my tool rather than sort of depositing, so I can always do a little bit of a scrape. And I'm sort of nudging and trying to see that, that first Sharpie ring and keeping to that shape as best I can. I don't want to let the bottom get too fat. I want to make sure that the plaster silica is sort of even along all edges. It's like icing a cake now. So now I'm both smoothing and removing some material. And I'm allowing the shape of the object to persist because I want the mold to be able to heat up pretty evenly in the kiln. So I don't want there to be super thick or super thin spots, but rather trying to create a pretty even walled mold with each layer. And I'm good. I'm sort of within my Sharpie ring on all sides. And you can see that as I'm working, the plaster is really stiffening up. And I'm gonna let it stay that way. I'm not gonna do much more. All of these little spiky bits, like the bad hair day that my mold is having right now, is actually gonna be helpful as like a mechanical lock for that third layer. It is tempting to just keep touching it until it starts really resisting you, but don't. Stop now. You can see that the plaster still has just a little bit of give to it, but is clearly no longer running. This is a good place to pause. So I'm gonna clean my coddle.
So pause.
Yeah, so we're gonna pause. I'm gonna clean up my coddle and my table, and then I'll meet you over to do the final layer, which has a little extra bit for you to learn about. All right, so we're back over in the mold mixing station. Updraft is on. I've got my mask on. I'm gonna pull over my 2 pounds of plaster silica, my 4 pounds of plaster silica, my 2 pounds of water, and we're going to add a third dry material to this mix. We're not going to change the weight of the water that we have, we're just going to add a scoopful of grog. Grog is a pre-fired ceramic. This is a medium grog, and it adds a strength to our jacket layer. We would never mix it in to a layer that was closer to the surface than this layer, because it can adhere to the glass and it can make it crack, or it could just give you like shitty bumpy clay nubbies on your glass. You don't want that. So there's no exact measurement that I'm going to ask you to do, but you can always zero out your scale and do like a 1-to-1 to your plaster. So that's 1 pound. I'm just going to fill up my cup. That's 1.5 pounds. That's going to be fine. I don't need to do any more than that. You'll see I'm also sort of looking for a color, sort of like a very light uniform gray. So I'm just going to take my hand and mix in the grog into my plaster silica. So I'm getting this sort of uniform aggregate into the powder, into the refractory. So you can, I don't know if you can see, but it sort of changed the overall color, a little speckly gray all through now. And again, always, always, always dry into wet. Some of it stuck to my hand. Then we'll let it slake for 3 minutes, same as always, and we'll mix it over at the workstation.